back to Beyond the IT Headlines. Today, we've got a discussion I'm super excited about. Folks, we're roughly 3 years into this AI journey, and frankly, the early investment has been propelled by the fear of missing out. Every organization, every board is asking themselves, what do I need to do? What do we need to do in relation to the build out of AI in order to ensure that we're not left behind? That has brought an enormous investment into the space and an enormous amount of prototyping and testing that has been seen along the way. But as we enter 2026 and 2027 and 2028, we're really going to have to ask ourselves, what are the long-term benefits of a lot of these projects? What value is going to come out the other end that's really going to propel? Is it going to be productivity? Is it going to be worker satisfaction? Is it going to be revenue growth, risk reduction, cost reduction? Well, today's guest is really here to talk about the people and the commitment that are going to be necessary to drive us forward, and more specifically, the systems, the workflows, the efficiency that we're going to have to drive in order to carry AI through this initial phase into the mainstreaming that lies ahead. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Prashant Parida, a technology and transformation executive who's led AI strategy, investment governance, portfolio management, and enterprise transformation at a global scale. In addition to his current work at IBM, he's actively involved in building healthcare innovation ecosystems through collaborations with the United Nations digital health community, healthcare organizations, and emerging technology ventures. Welcome, Prashant.
Thanks, Shawn. Thanks for having me.
So, look, what's most exciting, and you and I have had a few discussions about this, is we're all learning, right? I mean, nobody's really more than 3 years into this unless they were a PhD or some sort of academic that was studying this back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today. It's incredibly exciting. The velocity is enormous. There's a new release every week. And you've got boardrooms clamoring to get this stuff operational and start to see value at the other end. Maybe you can start a little bit with, at the largest accounts, those that you're talking to about their journey and where they're at. What are you seeing? What are you feeling?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that. I've spoken to about 17 leaders who have been leading AI adoption in pretty large companies. One of them is a pharma giant, upward of 80 billion in revenue. And the way they're approaching versus another company, which is about 120 billion in revenue in the media space, is very, very different. And the term you used is velocity, right? That's a fascinating term because, when I'm at home and the kind of tools I have access to, name it, right? Gemini, OpenAI, Claude, things that I can do is like 300%. I can be three times more productive, right? But the companies that we work for, when you go there, you realize, okay, I can do all of that, but do I really have access to those tools? I mean, leave aside all the concepts around, okay, the AI is here, the potential is large and all that, right? But what I'm able to do day to day in my workplace really defines what the enterprise can be doing with it, right? But if you don't fix that, no matter how much you talk about use cases, it comes down to that basic. Every individual that comes in produces work. That work within a team becomes the functional output. And that functional output within the enterprise becomes the impact of the enterprise, which goes into revenue and cost and margin, right? But unless you fix the lowest denominator, as in a person comes in, does the work, if that doesn't change, nothing really changes. I'll pause there.
So I love where you're going with this. So what you're saying is the tools have come an incredible way forward. The models continue to mature, but it almost feels like you're pointing to a crack in the way that organizations have trained themselves to do work and conduct business is where the real gap is here. Are you basically saying as organizations, we're going to have to relearn how our organizations operate, what we expect of our employees, and how this sort of human plus machine transition changes things? Like, this is not just buy a piece of software or buy a product or buy a cloud. This sounds like this is a complete reengineering of how work gets done.
Absolutely. I think Satya Nadella, from Microsoft put it that way, right? So if you look at the lowest denomination of how work gets done, that has changed. So the tools you bring in, like if, for example, I'll just give an example. Let's say I'm hiring a carpenter for my housework. Let's say I'm repairing windows. There is one carpenter who comes with his tools, and there is one guy who comes with pre-assembled window units, right? Who will I work with? I'll work with the guy who's come prepared with new tooling, right? Same is the story. Unless I allow people to use the tools that are new in the hopper, work will not change, right? Right? If
Okay.
work doesn't get changed, expecting some big use case to deliver some kind of impact is really not going to happen, right?
But let's click into that. So is that permission? You're allowed to use these tools? Is that enablement? You know how to use these tools? Is that security? We trust these tools, or is it something else?
I think it's a combination. So let's say if I'm using, I mean, let me draw a parallel. Let's say I have a lab report from my blood works, right? I have the freedom myself to give it to ChatGPT, and then it can interpret things for me. Let's say if I change that scenario, go to my workplace and say, okay, I want to now use ChatGPT to help me with some insights. Then it gets into data privacy, right? In security and stuff like that. The enterprises want to control, because you don't want to get your customer data, your enterprise data going into ChatGPT or any other tool for that matter. So therefore, when you deploy AI in the house or in the enterprise, it's different, because you have to have the governance layer, you have to have the policies defined so that people use it responsibly and not just go the way they would do at a personal space.
Okay, so let's break that down. So we're talking about individual tasks. We're talking about what individual people do and whether those tasks stay with humans, whether those tasks move to agents, whether those tasks become a partnership between humans and agents. This sounds really complex. It sounds really hard. I mean, how do you get through this discussion with an organization? Like, how do you
Yeah,
break down these roles and these tasks? Like, how do you get started?
I think it's not very hard really, because let's say if I come to work, there are things which are very repetitive, right? I like paying invoices, right? Looking at bills, doing some research. It's very repetitive, right? Then there is a bunch of tasks which is more analytics, more judgment kind of stuff, and then there are a bunch of tasks which are more like creative, more like strategy work, right? So everyone does a combination of all of these, right? Especially for white collar jobs. Like in my role, I do a lot of creative work, a lot of strategy work, less of repetitive tasks, right? But if somebody really sits down and says, okay, all the tasks I do can be put into these three buckets: repetitive, insight based, and strategy. Then you could say, okay, large part of the automation can be done with the repetitive tasks, right?
Mm.
And then you could build agents, to do that per se. But then when it comes to judgment and insights, you may do a combination, right? You still want to do the orchestration, and you still want to control the narrative. But then when it comes to strategy work, I would think you just give the grunt research work to the agents, but then keep the most of creative, the thesis formation, the research part to yourself. And I would think if I do that in my personal workspace, and Sean, you were talking about how you are using AI to improve your productivity. I think that's important to do it for every individual.
Mm.
I would think, for me, I can automate pretty much 50% of my repetitive tasks, right? If I do that, then I release bandwidth for more creative work. And that's how I produce capacity for the org to do more better quality work.
So, okay, so everything you're describing to me makes sense of how to break it down. I guess what I'm struggling with is a little bit of the stasis that we see in companies in general that just says we're all so busy doing what we do every day that we don't have a lot of time to think about how to do it better or how to do it more efficiently. And
Yeah.
more specifically, if I'm an employee doing that repetitive work and maybe I don't even have the skill to start to do the judgmental or the strategic work, is the organization going to retrain me and up level me? Or am I essentially working my way out of a job by bringing these capabilities into my company? So let's talk a little bit about the people aspect of
Yeah.
this. How do you
Yes.
how do you juggle that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I'll give you a real example. So there is, I'll not quote names per se, but there is a application integration team within a large enterprise said, okay, you could now use AI to do your coding, specifications and stuff like that. So you could reduce your effort by like 40%. Now that becomes interesting because this is a 100 people team, and then when you say it reduces by 40, that means you get rid of 40 people. So So what is the mandate? So the guy who is working on the business case will never release those people, because then you're firing your own team, right? Why would you do that, right?
Mhm.
I would think so. Therefore, I'll now talk about one example. Let's say this is something that I wrote about on my last article on LinkedIn about IKEA. They have like 8,500 people in customer care. People call in, they answer questions, and they put AI to work, and they reduced 47% of workload by AI. That means that many people actually got released. Now, what they did upfront was said, okay, why are people calling in? Somebody has a question about a furniture, about a carpet, about interiors, right? So these guys have domain expertise because they answer calls day in, day out, right? So they retrain them in interior design. So they repurpose these people into interior decoration. So now when people call in, AI agents take care of the routine stuff, but now they can use these people to guide people on how to improve your workspace, how to improve your interiors. They produced a $1.3 billion in revenue, with these people, which is like 10, 12 times more than what they were saving, by getting rid of people. So I would think, you have this business case around, okay, so let's automate 47% of the tasks. But then the capacity that you release can be repurposed to produce new revenue. That is
Mhm.
where it becomes a safe place. So coming back to my example, if you say, okay, 100 people are there, you release 40, you'll never get support from the team. But if you say these 40 people now can engage in repurposing work and produce new revenue, it works for the company, it works for the people, and it's a win-win game for everyone, right? I think that is the model that will work a big way in enterprise AI adoption, as opposed to saying, okay, let's improve productivity and figure out how to deploy AI agents. It's
So,
more
so
a
what I
business
what I
case tool. Yeah.
what I think I heard you said there was the productivity gain is not cost savings. The
Yes.
productivity gain is what fuels revenue growth.
Yes. Exactly.
It's the same amount of people or even more people
Mhm.
generating more revenue
Yes. Yes.
rather than AI replacing jobs and just fundamentally cutting costs.
Yes.
And I think that's a big one for us to
Yes.
chew on
Yes. Yes.
because there's a lot of talk. I even saw a new term last week. I think it was called AI employment, meaning
Yeah.
unemployment due to AI.
Mhm.
And what I think you're saying is actually the companies that do this right are going to give their employees more meaningful work. But more importantly, they're going to focus them on those judgmental and strategic tasks that actually are a force multiplier in driving revenue.
Yes. Yes.
Did I hear that right?
Yes, absolutely. I think when the dust settles, right? When, let's say, in the beginning, in the hype curve, when people use AI tools ahead of others, they have this unfair advantage, right? But then when the dust settles, everything becomes the same, right? So if AI does everything, what remains is the human side of what could make a difference, right? Like between two chefs in restaurants, right? A chef is a better chef because you understand the recipe. More than that, you understand your audience, right? You may have a brilliant kitchen, but kitchen doesn't make you a better chef, right? So I don't think AI will make you a better business or a better product. AI will elevate the bar, but then when everybody has AI, then your differentiation comes back to being human, right? I would think that's very
Mm.
important, right? Unless you look at the upside of how people get engaged, how revenue gets created when everybody else has the same tools, I think that's the game.
Yeah, that's great, right? I mean, it's a little bit like if I was talking to you about ride hailing services and I
Yeah,
said everybody's got a similar app.
yeah,
What really is the differentiator? It's the driver, it's
yeah,
the cars,
exactly. Yeah, the
right?
conversations.
And
Yeah,
the irony is, of course, in that particular business, it's the piece that those companies have the least amount of control over. But
yes,
eventually, the app and the technology becomes a commodity, becomes a
yes,
tool, becomes a platform.
yes.
But it's the humans on top of it that deliver that last mile that make all the difference. So let's talk about that. So we talked about repetitive tasks, and obviously, those tasks and the programmatization of those tasks is going to require a very deep look at both the data and how that data is used. Tell me what you're seeing today. I mean, how far away are we from AI ready data, and how big a challenge is this for the market?
Yeah, I think the interesting piece about data is, the reality is no matter how much money you spent on data bricks or Snowflake and trying to figure out the data, tribal knowledge still is retained in folders, right? And for AI to be effective, you have to have access to a complete data set. Because if your data set is not complete, I think in one of your podcasts, somebody was giving that example. Let's say if you ask a deterministic question about credit score, I think Paul was talking about it. You need a definite answer. Your credit score has to be, unless something is changed, right? But if you want to ask a question about what can be my network, then it's a probabilistic situation.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on your investment, depends on your risk averseness, depends on your portfolio, right? So depending on what the use case is, data has to be decision grade, right? So unless you complete that data set, you better not use AI. Then use it only for creative stuff, which is more probabilistic, right?
Well, but let's dig in there. I mean, our organization's really at a point where they have deterministic answers, because you've seen some early chatbots fail because, oh, there was a document or a policy that was out of date that would have been quoting misinformation.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like humans today are kind of the go-between of a vast library of stuff that might be current and might not, and then leveraging their experience to determine whether that's the right answer. Sounds like there's a whole cleanup here that says I actually need to get my policies and my procedures and my deterministic data in place and clean before I can even trust the machines or the AI to actually make these decisions.
Yes, I think that has been the biggest challenge. Like if you look at enterprise IT or tech spend, 80%, 70, 80% goes into maintaining what you have, because that's mission critical for your business. You only have 15, 20% for innovation. Now suddenly AI asks for a lot more. So how do you begin, right? So part of my work is looking at business cases, right? I think a good way to look at that is pick the lowest hanging fruit with very clear definition of data being available and very controlled environment where you exactly know what is being put in and what is the ROI, like the IKEA business case I was talking about, right? You should be very clear about, what is the challenge, what are we really solving for, what is the outcome per se, and look at it over like multiple quarters. It's not like you'll get ROI right from in the day one, right? You have to build a product, then say, okay, first quarter we built it, right? The second quarter you say, okay, people are using it, because if people are using it, then it is being effectively deployed, right? And if people start really using it, then it reduces cycle time, right? And if it reduces cycle time, it will reduce cost and therefore improve your margins and therefore also improve your revenue. So you have to do the whole cycle for small little projects, right, which have a clear definitive business case. If you do that, then it actually gives you a context that, okay, this is how you deploy AI in this organization, because that organization story will be different for different organizations. If you move from a controlled environment, I think you will have the recipe that works for your organization that you can scale.
Okay, so you've talked about sort of take one problem, take one element, take one concept, bite it off, build it, launch it.
Yes.
Right. So let's talk that a minimally viable product. Let's call
Yes.
that kind of gate one.
Yeah.
What's gate two? What's gate three? What's gate four? How should organizations be thinking about the maturity of these projects?
Yeah, I think I'll just give you one example from a work I'm doing with a venture, early stage venture. So they have taken, marketing as a functional use case. So if you look at marketing, it's the most impacted, because content, media, all of that is, probabilistic AI, and AI is very good with that, right? Media creation, content, and stuff. So what they have done is they said, okay, if you spend $100 in marketing, right, there are components that AI can do. So do you want to do it the old way, or do you really want to do it the new way, right? So they have picked up places where you can actually get AI to get intelligence, build your campaign strategy based on that intelligence, and create media right from there and deploy to the channels you want. You don't want to get into people intervening there, right? So now you pick up one space from the $800, like $40 is scope. And then that $40 can now be done in $20, right? That's a complete agentic orchestration of marketing as a function. So I would think once you do these small little pilots with controlled environments, controlled ROI, you can look at a function where you pick up 4 or 5 of those and then connect them in a way that becomes a functional outcome. Therefore, you could reduce cycle time, in marketing by, let's say, 30%. And then you take it to across functions, marketing, sales, through delivery, through solutioning, and then you could have a bigger impact across the enterprise.
What I really heard you say there was launch the MVP,
Yeah.
prove the value of the MVP, then look for adoption. Make sure that the place where it was deployed, that the teams that are deploying it are on board and receiving the value that was expected. Then take that MVP, take that same use case and extend it across the rest of the organization. Yes. Don't worry about expanding use cases. Just take that use case and expand it within the segment, within the function that it is. Yeah. And then go and measure the financial savings. Yeah. But I want to bring back the point earlier. It's not about cutting people. Yeah. It's not about removing people. Yeah. It's about actually driving, I'll call it a larger revenue contribution per customer by putting humans closer to the judgmental and strategic decisions. I mean, I love the IKEA example because frankly, if I solve a customer's problem, they're going to come back and buy more. Yeah. But if I put those people into design coordination, they're actually going to want more stuff. They're going to buy the mirror. They're going to buy the carpet. They're going to buy the extra piece of furniture rather than just telling me how to put it, asking me how to put it together. Yeah. So as we round out this episode, you gave us a great example with IKEA. I think that really helps me understand how this can sort of move things forward. What would your guidance be for our listeners? I mean, we're entering this exciting, scary, somewhat uncertain transition, and we've got a lot of executives that are going to have to lead through it. So what's your guidance to folks who are trying to explain to their teams where we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there?
I think the ones that will succeed is when you have thought through the business case, like the IKEA example, right? So you start small, but then create a business case in terms of reinventing the business, as opposed to saying, okay, let's release productivity and let's release people off the jobs. That's not going to work. The smarter ones will really reinvent the business from first principles, applying AI tools, the way they will rebuild from ground up. And therefore, I would believe, look at a revenue upside while you're releasing productivity. I think that will be a good way to scale while deploying AI and creating a win-win game for everyone.
Okay, last question for you. So there's a lot of what I'll call unintentional blindness here. There's folks who hear the terms, they see AI, they listen to this podcast, they read a lot about it, but they haven't personally been exposed to a lot of what's going on. They're not even aware of what is possible. What's your recommendation for folks who just want to kind of get a little bit more situationally aware and understand what's going on here? Is there some simple things they can do?
Yeah, what I do is I use all the AI tools. So I would think, you go to any AI tool as default, right? These days, what I do, I don't even, build my thesis without consulting, AI. I come in, I just put a question into AI. And you'll be surprised what it can tell you, right? And be open about it. And as you build on the top of it, you'll realize that the AI will teach you how to make the most of AI. I think that would be a simple advice for people who are trying to grapple with this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just the simple thing, Prashant, that we were talking about just earlier. I mean, people think of Claude Code or any of the derivatives, and they say, "Well, I'm not a coder. I don't need to worry about it." But the reality is, in tomorrow's world, everybody's a coder.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And the only way for you to be really situationally aware to what is possible is for you to start and jump in and realize that the throwaway cost, even if you build something that never sees the light of day, it's going to cost you $2 or $3. But you're going to learn what's possible and you're going to see the power of what lies ahead, which will allow you to actually frame the potential value that lies here. So look, I sincerely appreciate the conversation. I think we'll have to have you back to dig in on some of this a little bit more. For our listeners, I very much would encourage everybody to go out there and really think about what we talked about today, the workflows within the organization, the concept of repetitive tasks, judgmental tasks, strategic tasks, and how AI essentially envelops and delivers this layer that doesn't cut cost. It actually drives revenue. Yes. With that, on behalf of Prashant, I am Shawn Rosemarin here on the IT Headlines. I encourage everyone to go out to the Data Wire. You'll find Prashant's article and some more interviews related to this topic. And other than that, we will see you next time.